for the next few weeks, months, years. Not everything that he has to do needs to take so long. Let's talk about the death penalty, for example. So President Biden could take steps to abolish this heinous practice pretty much immediately. And today we're going to talk about exactly how he can do that. But before we do that, I want to take a step back and acknowledge the latest life that was taken by the Trump administration. So late last week, Dustin Higgs, a Black man, a father, became the 13th and final casualty of Trump's last-minute executions. And 5 people who were executed under the Trump administration, there were 13 total, were put to death after his election loss in November. And if their executions had been delayed just a week, their lives could have been saved. That's because President Biden has said that he will not oversee federal executions. And so that didn't happen. Their executions were not delayed, and as a result, Dustin Higgs died by lethal injection in the early hours of Saturday morning. And so with Biden in the White House now, he is in a position to make sure that this never happens again. Now, he has made a promise not to carry out the federal death penalty while he is in office. This is the same promise that President Obama, former President Obama, made when he was in office as well. But all that did was hit the pause button. It simply made it so that no executions were carried out during his term, but another president who was pro-death penalty was able to resume federal executions as Donald Trump did. And so that's why Biden must take direct action to end the death penalty by immediately commuting all the sentences of people who are on federal death row. Commuting those sentences. This would be the easiest way to ensure that the practice is finally abolished once and for all. And so to talk about how this would work, to discuss what else can be done to abolish the federal death penalty, I am so pleased to again welcome Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts and Sister Helen Prejean, 2 of the nation's foremost advocates for abolishing the death penalty. Thank you both so much for joining me today on the Appeal Live, and happy 2021.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Great. So Representative Pressley, I'll start out with you. Can you talk to us about what we've seen from Biden so far on the issue of the death penalty, either yesterday or leading up to the inauguration, and where do we stand right now?
Sure. Well, President Biden has repeatedly expressed his opposition to the death penalty, and eliminating it was a core element of his criminal justice plan during the campaign. There's also been recent reporting that he will take actions to halt federal executions in the coming days, which is encouraging. But it is critical that he also prohibit federal prosecutors from seeking the death penalty and eliminate and dismantle death row at the Terre Haute facility. So we're encouraged by what we're hearing. I think that is a testament to this movement and all who are a part of it and our vigilance. State-sanctioned murder is not justice. The fact that in recent days, as the Trump administration was coming to a close, that they've executed more people than in the last 6 decades, quite literally a killing spree. We have an opportunity to save lives. And that's why I continue to call on this administration to use the full authority of their powers by the stroke of a pen by executive action to halt federal executions. But we also need to just abolish the federal death penalty, period, which is also why I've introduced a bill with Senator Dick Durbin, who will now be the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So, and momentum just continues to grow. When we initially introduced that bill, we had about 20 co-sponsors. But then because, again, of the vigilance of the movement, I think an inflection point was the execution of Brandon following the last time we came together at this virtual table. And now we have 80 co-sponsors to support our bill to abolish the federal death penalty.
So it seems like a lot of people are really recognizing the importance of abolishing the federal death penalty. And so, but for those who don't, I will kick it to Sister Helen Prejean to ask sort of a general question, which is, why do you believe it's so important for the Biden administration to take these executive actions to halt federal executions? And by the way, after I ask this question of Sister Helen, I will turn it back to you, Representative Pressley, for the same question.
Well, the reason it's so important is because the death penalty encapsulates in it all the deep wounds of our society. Only poor people are chosen for death. Racism is in it because overwhelmingly it's when white people are killed, when Black people are killed, who are at least 50% of all the homicides. If life is not valued, there's no outrage over the death. And then the third thing that the death penalty symbolizes is that you solve social problems by using violence. We've just had a president whose whole style was dominance and violence. And so by doing away with the federal death penalty, we have a new attorney general. Well, do we have a new attorney general yet? Merrick Garland, is he? We got things in flux. Do we have a new attorney general yet? Anybody know?
Let's see if anybody knows.
Well, yes, he's been nominated.
He's nominated, okay.
Yes.
But you know from being with the Biden administration, if an attorney general does not push for the death penalty, I mean, all the other attorney generals get the signal. And so I believe that it is going to halt. And what I see present is, as the people awaken, then the leaders awaken. And I've seen this over 30 years with the death penalty. So that in 2019, that when people were given the choice between life and death, only 36% of the American public chose death. And this is from 80% support for the death penalty when Dead Man Walking came out. So I believe, and of course, this is what Biden needs to do, because this symbol, it's also embodies in it torture of human beings, which we don't have. The Supreme Court will be the last, especially with the new appointments. They'll be the last to recognize what's going on here. They never get it about race. They always come in last. But it also embodies torture, because to sentence to death on a certain date and time, a conscious, imaginative human being who anticipates death, and all the people, the 6 people I've been with, been executed, die in their minds and in their nightmares 1,000 times before they die, because they have imaginations and they anticipate. So it also will deal with the question of torture. So it's a preeminent, urgent, moral issue that we deal with right away. And that's the urgency I see in it. And that we want to get all the popular support we can to urge him to go all the way. Stop the executions, which he can do tomorrow, commute the sentences, and then finally, Representative Pressley, we will need to pass the bill, which has been introduced, to end the death penalty. And the movement is all in that direction now.
Same question for you, Representative Pressley. Why is it so important for the Biden administration to take executive action to halt federal executions, in addition to passing your bill, of course?
Absolutely. Well, I co-signed, all that my dear sister there offered. And, my team and I just continue to be in just active communication with the Biden transition team about this issue. We were doing that before yesterday's inaugural events, before he formally took an oath of office. And so now that will continue. We just have to be vigilant. Last month I had 40 of my House colleagues sign onto a letter calling on President Biden to end the use of the federal death penalty by executive order. Again, 40 strong. I'm also partnering currently with my sister in service, Representative Cori Bush, and other members of Congress on a letter that calls on the president to exercise his clemency power to commute the sentences of individuals currently on death row, and calling for individual resentencing. There are some 240 grassroots organizations who support abolishing the death penalty. Again, I think that has everything to do with the vigilance and the sustained efforts of this movement and all of you, which is why we want to keep our foot on the gas here. And I think it's also against the backdrop of this national reckoning on racial justice. And so more and more people are coming to appreciate abolishing the federal death penalty, not only as a priority within the reforms that they they seek on when it comes to our criminal legal system, but also as a priority in the context of a racial justice agenda. And so that's why President Biden must be responsive to the mandate from the people who are overwhelmingly supportive of this, make good on the promise that he made while campaigning, and use the full authority of his office and the stroke of a pen by executive action. And then again, Senator Durbin and I, now that he will be the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which certainly makes me like our chances for the growing momentum around the bill. And then we'll, continue to keep the pressure up until we pass that.
It's interesting to hear both of you talk about sort of the violent nature of the death penalty, its racist roots. And it also reminds me, and when we connect that to what Biden has to do moving forward, it reminds me of, his sort of campaign slogan, which was saving the soul of the nation. And this really seems to center that. And so I guess I'm curious to hear from both of you. Both of you can answer all of these questions. So are you optimistic? And where do you see Biden in terms of how far he's come with regards to his record, what conversations you've had with him, if you think he's going to move on this, and what folks need to do to make sure he does? And I will start with Sister Helen.
Yeah, and let me pick up on soul of the nation. See, the direction we're all going in is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the human rights, which most nations, the majority of nations in the world, 40 years ago, we only had a handful of nations that had abolished the death penalty. And now the majority of the nations of the world. Article 3 is, and these are inalienable human rights, which means they can't be alienated from the person. These are human rights simply because you are a person. And the first one is the right to life, which means governments can't take life away for good behavior, bad behavior, or give it for good behavior. It's not theirs to give. And Article 5, no one should be subjected to cruel and degrading punishment and torture. As we awaken, and I do believe that the awakening about racial justice is really a key factor that's helping us become aware of the death penalty and that it's intrinsically wrong, that there's no way to get it right. It took 1,500 years of dialogue in the Catholic Church to reach a point of saying you can never entrust over to government the right to take life, because invariably they're going to go for people that they consider dangerous or whatever. You can't. And the Trump administration carrying out the power to kill people simply because they could just shows how capricious, utterly capricious. Look at the killing of the last 5 people, even after Trump had lost the election. Look at Corey Johnson, who was mentally challenged. His last words, and this, of course, hit the people. People could see this, see? His last words were to thank the guards for taking such good care of him. And then he talked about how he enjoyed his last meal. And he said, but they forgot the jelly donut. They're going to need to fix that. The last words of a man being killed by the government. And then when you look at the rest of the others, all of them have their story. How did you choose them as the worst of the worst in this whole political setup, which just was impossible to do? And so when you talk about the soul of a nation, we have to talk about human rights, and we have to stand in human rights with the rest of the countries of the world. The Supreme Court, in their attitudes that they have, because all of them are privileged people and most of them are white, when they interpret, equal protection under the law, they read it through their privileged experience and they don't get it. But as the people get it, then we change it. And that's the soul of the nation, is that essential humanness that we all share, and that you cannot give an absolute power over life or death to politicians that can change with the wind or depending what their political agenda is. Biden has grown. Kamala Harris has grown. We all have grown. And we got to allow people room to grow. But our demand has got to be, and what we struggle for, principled opposition to the death penalty, abolition, got to end it. Got to end it.
Yeah, and I would just pick up on that just as I continue to meditate and reflect upon yesterday's inaugural activities and the truth telling and the stirring and resonant words of the young poet there, Amanda Gorman, when she said, we do not seek a more perfect union, we seek a more purposed union. You know, the reason why, I'll speak for myself, I exhaled yesterday is because we've been drinking from this fire hose the last 4 years of an administration that has contempt for the American people, that moved with cruelty and callousness and criminality. And I do believe in this administration, we have partners who will lead with compassion. And that's the more purposed union that I certainly want to be a part of, and the work that I want, and the country that I want to build. Amanda Gorman talked about this nation being unfinished, right? And so I think the goal here is to center the humanity of people in all things. And in talking about this issue as something that our dear sister does so effectively, and I thank the Peel for holding space for those who have already been murdered, that were victims of Trump's killing spree, which is so important. You know, we're talking about people. You know, this is not some abstract issue. We're talking about people's lives. And right now there are 50 individuals that are currently on death row. And this is why from during the transition and now, and I'm encouraged by the conversations that I've had with the Biden administration. They have been positive to date. And again, he's expressed his opposition to the death penalty throughout his campaign. He made it a principal tenet of his criminal justice plan during the campaign. So ultimately, this is about Biden making good on the expressed commitments that he made throughout the campaign. This is the codifying and the acknowledgement that we are now moving from an administration that was cruel and had contempt to one that has compassion, moving towards a more purposed union and seeing the humanity of every single person. And that includes those that have been condemned. And so we have to continue to apply pressure and to keep up the fight, to halt federal executions, to ultimately abolish the federal death penalty in its totality, to close the Terre Haute facility, and for those that are already on death row, for them to be resentenced, but also for the administration. And again, they have a mandate to do this from the people, to use that mandate and to use the full power of their clemency.
Could I just say something about, against staying with the soul of the nation? The goodness of the American people. For 30 years now, I have been conducting this dialogue with the American people about the death penalty. And in the 80s, 80%, 90% of people in Louisiana supported it. When I came out of that execution, that very first man where I witnessed, they killed him, they electrocuted him to death. And outside of the prison gates, in the dark, threw up, had never watched the deliberate killing of a human being before. And I remember thinking, you know, the American people are good. They've been made to be afraid of people because they were so demonized. These are the worst of the worst. These people are murderers in their character. We can't put them in prison. They'll kill other inmates. They were so demonized, and the people were made afraid. And then you put in it the other element. They're separated from watching what it means to kill people. It's a secret process that goes on behind prison walls. And that's how my whole mission was born, because I got thrown into it and I was a witness. And when you've been a witness to something, then your eyes have seen it and your soul's on fire with it, what you do is you start going to the people. And it's through story. It can't just be where you give people statistics. You want to know how racist it is. You want to know only poor people. Statistics alone and data do not change minds and hearts, but stories do. And I found that you had to bring people, you had to go with them on the whole journey, starting with outrage over the death of innocent people. You start with the suffering of the victim. And these families that I've known, like Lloyd LeBlanc, whose son David, he saw his son alive on a Friday night before he went out to a football game, and he never saw his son alive again. And then there's the sheriff's deputy on his front porch saying, Mr. LeBlanc, you got to come with us. We think we have your boy in the morgue. We need you to identify the body. The trauma, the grief, the suffering of victims' families. And so people's starting point, the struggle with the death penalties, but look at what they did. And that desire politicians to identify the human person solely with the crime. And you have to walk with people through it. But first, you got to acknowledge with them the outrage over their crime, and then to take them step by step into what it means now. And you end with, that's the way I set up Dead Man Walking and the journey in every talk I give, and take them into the execution chamber. We've acknowledged the terribleness of the crime. We see the suffering of the victim's family. Do you really think that they're going to wait 15 or 20 years and they're going to watch as the state kills the one who killed their loved one, and they witness that violence, and that violence can heal them? And you got to take them there. You got to go with them there.
Sister Helen, I want to follow up on that. I'm sorry, unless
Oh
Representative.
no, I was just saying, she just gets me every time. Just wise words, from this frontline warrior. Just so grateful for you, sister. So grateful.
No, it's mutual. We're sisters. We work together. I mean, that it takes us together. And when you descend into something really big like this, imagine me. All while Tim Robbins was doing the movie, A Dead Man Walking, he kept saying, the nun is in over her head. I mean, here you have white privileged woman, never been in a prison before. And I got thrown into the bloom death penalty and watch these executions. And what am I going to do? Well, once you're on fire like that, you just start. You just get in there. And the first thing you do is you learn from each other. ACLU was my first teacher. They were the first one to print out an actual pamphlet and publish it about why the death penalty was wrong and against our constitutional rights. And then Amnesty International taught me about human rights. So you look for your teachers, and then you look for people with whom you join in community, because you can't do it by yourself. And that's what keeps you going.
I'm just awed to be in the presence of this community right here. It's a pleasure. But I also, so Sister Helen, I want to touch upon what you just talked about, being on the front lines, and particularly, something I'm thinking that the Biden administration could say is, well, sure, we can commute all of these sentences, but we have a lot of time to do that. We could do that towards the end of the term. As somebody who has walked with folks who have been executed, can you talk about the urgency of doing that right away and what it's like for those folks to have the death penalty hanging over their head?
Yeah, the man that I'm accompanying now, Manuel Ortiz, he's from El Salvador. I've accompanied 6 people to execution. Manuel is my 7th person. 3 of the 7 people have been innocent. That's how broken it is, because the system fault lines are in the thing. He talks about it, about having the death penalty over him as having a 1,000-pound gorilla on his back. The heaviness of that they can kill me. And watching as other people will walk past his cell on their way to the death chamber. It's almost impossible for us to get our minds around that the taking of life. Joseph Odell in Virginia that I was with, he had watched 20 people led out to be killed. And so it's such an atrocity. It so goes to the heart of everything that we're about, and the deep wounds I mentioned, that it has an urgency. Do it, and do it right away. Because when something's urgent and it's deeply symbolic of a lot of things that are wrong, you want to cut at the root. Radix, that's the meaning of radical. Go to the root of it. It's wrong, needs to be abolished. Do it. It's the George Ryan thing that happened in Illinois. when the governor of Illinois, he helped put the death penalty statute in the Illinois legislature. And then when he's governor and the 13th innocent person was brought into his office as governor, he realized systemically something was wrong. And it took him a while. It's a real journey of conscience that he went on, and including that he reached the point of commuting all the sentences on death row in Illinois after several tries with the legislature to have a reform bills, and they wouldn't do it. And he made that decision to commute all the sentences. And it included commuting the sentence of a man on the Illinois death row who had killed George Ryan's next door neighbor, whom he loved very much, killed him in a very brutal, brutal way. And he said, if I'm going to commute sentences, I can't say, but when it touches my life, I'm not going to commute his sentence. He commuted all the sentences. And he effectively did one of the death blows to the death penalty that helped Illinois end it forever. So it has urgency, the moral urgency of what it stands for and what it is. And so to encourage President Biden to do it sooner, not later. Let's put it down on the list and let's just see the timing. What could be more urgent than life? And taking away that power and not using that power and ending that power of government officials over life and death.
Representative Pressley, I will ask you to take us out by telling all of our viewers, now that we all understand the urgency of this, if we did not before, what can folks who care about this issue do to support ending the death penalty?
Sure. Just before I give that sort of call to action, and I hope you'll have me back again, because there's a movement happening on the state level as well. I know we were focused on the federal level, which makes sense because we're talking about the Biden administration, and I'm a member of Congress. But we have seen a growing number of governors that have moratoriums. There's work that I'm doing in the oversight committee in my role, specifically on the subcommittee on civil rights and civil liberties, around the lethal injection method. So I hope to have an opportunity to speak about that another time. But we're just on the heels of the King holiday, and I've been thinking about him often, but especially now. And Dr. King was opposed to the death penalty. And when I'm advocating for the abolishing of the federal death penalty and the halting of federal executions, people in the Twitterverse and other spaces will often say, but if you had someone in your family murdered, you would feel differently. Well, I have had family members murdered, and this is still my position, because state-sanctioned murder is not justice. Dr. King was opposed to the death penalty, and Dr. King was murdered, and his family supports the death penalty. A dear sister friend of mine, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, said, I know who we are on Dr. King's birthday, but I want to know who we are on a regular old Tuesday. And so in this moment, let us do the work of true reconstruction in the midst of this reckoning and build a more just and humane society. And let us begin by abolishing the federal death penalty. This is, again, within the context of a racial justice agenda. Black folks are 13% of the population, but 42% of those that are on death row. We know 1 in 25 are innocent. And so if you want to be a part of this movement to build a more purposed union, a more humane and just society, I ask all of you to call your members of Congress and encourage them to support H.R. 262, which is my bill with Senator Durbin to end the federal death penalty and to resentence those currently on death row. 67 of our House colleagues have already joined us in co-sponsoring the bill. We have the support of more than 240 grassroots and national organizations across the country. The momentum is growing. I believe we have a mandate from the people. And what's the point of having a mandate if you don't use it? And so I'm calling on my colleagues in government to support our bill to abolish the federal death penalty. And again, we'll continue to keep up the pressure and to lean on the Biden-Harris administration for leadership and partnership in halting federal executions, in using their powers of clemency. I'm doing that push with my sister, Representative Cori Bush. And then also the resentencing of those 50 individuals that are currently on death row.
Thank you so much, Representative Ayanna Pressley and Sister Helen Prejean, for joining us today. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure, and keep fighting the good fight.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
That's all we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. You can follow us on The Appeal Live on Facebook and on Twitter. And in the meantime, make sure to call your representatives. Thanks for joining us today.